sometimes you can be totally exhausted. And then you wake up to go potty in the middle of the night. Ugh. It takes you hours to go back to sleep. So we had to pop it down at like 4 a.m. just to go back to sleep for a couple hours. So now it's 8 something. I'm still so tired.
Oh my goodness, take a look at this family. Kimberly and Damon, so many in disbelief. Amanda, known as Mandy Karolkiewicz, and her 6 children all killed. Her husband, Christopher, is accused of shooting all of them.
Just before 8 in the morning, someone smelled smoke on a quiet Michigan street and called it in. Firefighters checked the area, found nothing, and left. What they didn't know is that they just walked away from a house where 7 people were already dead. If you're new here, welcome to Crime Files. This is one of those cases that's hard to sit with. So if you want more stories covered honestly and with care, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and give us a like before we get into it. Let's start with what her life actually looked like, because that's what makes this so hard to process. Amanda Karokiwix went by Mandy. She was 39, living in a wooded subdivision called Riverwood in Grand Haven Township, Michigan, the kind of neighborhood with big trees, long driveways, and neighbors who mostly kept themselves but waved when they passed. She worked as a substitute teacher. She'd written a children's book called The Magical Mantra about learning to see the good in yourself, something she worked on closely with an illustrator who later said she grew close to Mandy through the process of making it. Mandy was also known in her community as an advocate for kids with special needs, someone people trusted with their own children. And she was a mom of 6. For boys, ages 15, 12, 11, and 5, and 2 11-year-old girls, Ella and Caroline, who she and her husband had adopted from China years earlier. If you look at Mandy's TikTok, and it's all still there, it tells the story of a family that seemingly had it all. Disney in Shanghai, cobblestone streets overseas, lazy pool afternoons, a beach photo of her and her husband with their arms around each other, both of them smiling like any couple on vacation. The 6 kids showing up again and again in the small, ordinary moments most parents live for: birthday cakes, car rides, backyard afternoons. Just over a week before she died, Mandy and her 2 daughters had come home from what she called one of the funniest and coolest experiences of her life, a trip to China where they visited Shanghai Disney and posed together in traditional Hanfu clothing, hair styled, faces done, holding decorative fans in front of a painted floral backdrop. She was proud of that trip, proud of giving her daughters a connection to where they came from. Her last TikTok post went up on July 17th. She wrote, "We are so ready to be home sweet home." 8 days later, she was dead. Her husband was Christopher Karokiewicz, who went by Chris. He was 47, and the couple had been married 17 years. Professionally, Chris had built a serious career. He was a national vice president of sales and marketing for the American Heart Association, specifically overseeing the division responsible for CPR and first aid training and products. He worked remotely, so most of his days happened from inside that home, at a desk somewhere under the same roof as his wife and 6 kids. And here's the detail that becomes very important later. His employment with the American Heart Association ended earlier that same July. He'd lost his job just weeks before the killings, and the organization later said in a statement that they were devastated by the news, that their thoughts were with the loved ones of everyone who died. From the outside, nothing about this family raised alarms. No history of police calls to that home. No public record of violence involving Chris. Neighbors had no reason to be worried. This was a couple who'd been together 17 years, who'd built a life with 6 kids under one roof, who by every visible measure were simply living an ordinary, full, occasionally exhausting family life, the kind most people would look at and think, they've got it figured out. But underneath that TikTok feed full of Disney trips and beach photos, something very different had been playing out for years, something Mandy herself had put into words long before anyone else knew to look for it. And it would only come to light after it was far too late to matter to the people who needed it most. Now, let's walk through the morning it all fell apart, because the timeline is unsettling once you slow down and actually look at it. Between 8:30 and 9 a.m. on Friday, July 24th, the Grand Haven Fire Department got reports of people smelling smoke near Riverside Trail, close to 148th Avenue and Mercury Drive. They responded, checked the area, and couldn't locate any fire. So they left, What investigators believe now is that the killings had likely already happened by that point, possibly starting the night before, Thursday evening, hours before anyone outside the house had any reason to suspect something was wrong, meaning the house had already gone completely silent long before the first call ever came in. Then, just before 11:45 that same morning, officials got another call, this time reporting white smoke coming from a home. Firefighters went back out to the same address, and this time they found it, smoke actually visible pouring out of the windows. Dispatch audio later obtained by reporters captured responders describing the house as full of smoke. As crews worked to put the fire out, they moved through the house, and that's when they found the bodies, all 8 of them, spread across various bedrooms throughout the home, not gathered in one place, but scattered to the rooms where they'd been sleeping or hiding. Investigators determined the fire had been set intentionally in multiple places throughout the home, including the basement, which took the worst of the damage, and the first floor. And critically, the fire came after the killings, not before. Whoever said it wasn't trying to hurt anyone else in that moment, because everyone inside that house was already gone. Investigators have never publicly confirmed why the fire was set. Maybe it was an attempt to destroy evidence. Maybe it was something else entirely, something more symbolic. That question has never been answered, and the sheriff's office has been careful not to speculate. What followed was one of the more painful investigations this community has seen in years. The Ottawa County Sheriff's Office treated it immediately as a suspicious death case the moment they realized there were gunshot wounds involved, multiple victims, a fire that didn't line up with any accidental explanation. Within hours, that quiet, wooded street was full of patrol vehicles and Michigan State Police arson investigators trying to reconstruct exactly what had happened behind those walls. By Monday, 3 days later, autopsies had been completed at Corewell Health Blodgett, and the sheriff's office held a press conference. Captain Jacob Sparks stood in front of the cameras and confirmed what many had already started to suspect. All 8 family members died from gunshot wounds. Christopher Karokiwix was ruled a suicide. His wife and all 6 children were ruled homicides. He'd used a registered handgun, and according to evidence collected at the scene, no one else had fired that weapon except him. The sheriff's office was also clear on one point that mattered a lot to a nervous community. There were no additional suspects. This wasn't someone still out there, so there was no ambiguity about who did this. The real question, the one this entire community has been asking ever since, the one that's impossible to let go of, was why. And that question is where the case takes its darkest turn. Because in the days after that press conference, journalists uncovered something that had been sitting online the entire time, in Mandy's own words, written years before any of this happened, long before anyone thought to go looking. Reporters at the Detroit News located a Reddit account under the username MandyK1179, and after cross-referencing marriage details, her kids' ages, her job, and her location in Grand Haven, confirmed it belonged to Mandy. Dozens of posts, most from around 2024, roughly 2 years before her death, sitting quietly in a forum called As One After Infidelity, a community built for people trying to rebuild a marriage after betrayal. This wasn't some anonymous rant. It was a public account, describing a very private struggle, one that nobody around her seems to have connected to what was actually unfolding at home. In one post, she described how she and Chris had met when she was an intern, and he was older, already divorced. 10 years and 5 kids later, she wrote, he was cheating again, with another intern the same age she had been when they first met, a detail that clearly cut deep, history repeating itself inside her own marriage. In her own words, she described a period of what she called self-loathing that lasted about a year, remembering crying and looking at herself in the mirror, realizing how messed up it was that she was the one living miserably because of what it had done, not him. She wrote about getting sober, about starting therapy so she could work through things clearly instead of numbing them. She wrote about the difficult decision to cut off extended family in order to protect her own mental health. She wrote that leaving felt insanely terrified with 6 kids in the picture, that starting over with that many children felt almost impossible to imagine. And in one especially striking line, she said he'd always had major red flags that she'd ignored, tying it back to her own trauma and what she called anxious attachment, the kind of self-aware, painfully honest writing that makes this so much harder to read now. These weren't the words of someone hiding a perfect marriage from a world. They were the words of someone who understood on some level that something in her marriage was genuinely dangerous and who kept choosing to stay anyway, for the sake of her kids, hoping things would eventually get better, which raises the hardest question sitting at the center of this entire case. If she saw it clearly enough to write it down in detail, why didn't anyone closer see it too, in time to actually do something about it? Investigators have said clearly that none of this confirms an exact motive. They're still going through documents recovered from the home, and as of the most recent updates, no note has been found explaining why he did what he did. What they have instead is a pattern, pieced together after the fact. A marriage with a documented history of infidelity and conflict stretching back years. A man who just lost a job that structured his entire daily life and identity. And then, without warning to anyone on the outside, an act of violence that ended 7 lives in a matter of hours and destroyed a family completely. Emily Jones, Mandy's cousin, has spoken for the family multiple times since this happened, and what she said captures the exhaustion and grief of simply not having answers. She said it feels personal, that this wasn't some stranger who did this, that everybody wants to know why and they may never actually get that answer. She's also pointed out something uncomfortable about how this is played out publicly, that strangers online picking apart Mandy's old posts and family photos has made an already unbearable loss even harder to sit with for the people who actually loved her and are trying to grieve. The community's response has been significant in the days since. Covenant Life Church hosted a night specifically for teenagers who knew the family's kids, giving them a space to process what happened together instead of alone. Counselors have been available every night since at local churches, for neighbors, first responders, children, and adults alike, anyone who needed somewhere to sit with what happened. A memorial along Riverside Trail has continued to grow. Flowers, cards, toys, handwritten messages, left by people who never met this family, but felt the weight of what happened to them anyway, because a tragedy this size doesn't stay contained to people directly involved. There's no trial coming in this case, no defendant to prosecute, no courtroom where anyone will have an answer for what happened. The only person who could ever explain any of this is also gone, which means this story doesn't end the way most true crime cases end, with a verdict or sentencing. It ends exactly where it started, with a grieving family and an entire community still trying to make sense of something that may never fully make sense, no matter how many documents investigators go through. What we're left with is a mother who dedicated her life to her own kids and to other people's kids, who wrote books about self-worth while quietly carrying pain of her own, who just given her daughters a trip of a lifetime only days before she died. A father who was clearly carrying something far heavier than anyone around him understood, something that had apparently been building for years and finally collapsed in a way that took his entire family down with him. And 6 kids who had absolutely nothing to do with any of it, whose only involvement in any of this was being born into this family and trusting the 2 people who were supposed to protect them above anyone else in the world. A few questions stay with me after putting this together. How many people who look completely fine on the outside, posting vacation photos, showing up to school pickups, are quietly falling apart in ways nobody around them can see? What actually separates someone who reaches a breaking point and asks for help from someone who reaches that same point and chooses violence instead? And when someone writes down a warning sign as clearly and honestly as Mandy did, years in advance, what would it actually take for people around her to recognize in time to change what happened? I don't think there are easy answers to any of that, and I'm not sure anyone, including the investigators who worked this case for weeks, will ever fully understand what happened inside that house on Riverside Trail. But this family deserves to be remembered as more than a headline, and their story deserves to be told with honesty and respect, not turned into something sensational. If this one stuck with you the way it stuck with me while putting it together, do me a favor, hit subscribe, tap that notification bell, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these stories the right way, with the care these families deserve. This has been Crime Files. Take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.